Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to decode an ancient text that honestly reads like a strikingly modern, incredibly precise manual on how socioeconomic systems rise, become fragile, and ultimately collapse. We're talking about Surah 34, historically known as Saba. In a world where we're constantly stressing out over fragile global supply chains, crumbling institutions, and the ups and downs of our economies, this text offers a blueprint that feels like it was written literally for us, right here, right now. So, before we dig into the data, we have to start by asking ourselves a pretty fundamental question. Look around at history, or heck, even the world we live in today. Structures that seem absolutely bulletproof, the ones we call too big to fail, they routinely shatter from the inside out. Why does that happen? What actually causes a massive, highly advanced civilization to just suddenly collapse? Well, it's not always a foreign invader or a brand meteor. More often than not, the rot starts entirely from within. And the answer to that profound question lies right here in Surah 34. Now, traditional interpretations of this text often lean really heavily into magical stories. You'll hear about talking birds, mythical dams, supernatural kings, the whole shebang. But when we look closer, it reveals itself not as ancient folklore at all, but as a timeless, precise manual on the dangers of elite greed and the true meaning of stewardship. By applying an internal linguistic reading, we uncover a rigorous architectural manual for survival. It's a deep critique of how human societies handle power, wealth, and, inevitably, systemic failure. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll establish the universal operating system. Then, we'll look at the functional alignment of Dawood and Suleiman, contrast that with the decentralized collapse of Saba, do an autopsy on why systems fail, and finally, figure out how to build true systemic security. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the Universal Operating System. Okay, so to really grasp this operating system, we first need to understand the analytical lens we're using. It's a methodology known as tasrif. Basically, tasrif relies exclusively on the internal linguistic architecture and contextual self-referencing of the Arabic text to figure out its precise meanings. And why is this absolutely crucial? Because relying on the text's own internal logic changes everything. It lets us strip away centuries of accumulated man-made myths and historical baggage. When we use tasrif on Surah 34, we aren't reading magical fables. We're reading a pure structural blueprint of cause and effect. The opening of this text establishes the ultimate operating rules through concepts like al-hamd and al-hakim. It clearly states that whatever is in the heavens and the earth belongs entirely to the designing authority. This is a massive paradigm shift. Total systemic ownership belongs to the creator. We humans, we possess absolutely nothing autonomously. In fact, our sense of complete autonomy is an illusion. When humans start to believe we independently own these resources, we inevitably build doomed frameworks. Any socioeconomic system that assumes absolute, unmediated human ownership is just in direct conflict with universal laws. And because of that, it's mathematically destined to crash. Moving on to Section 2, Functional Alignment. We're going to look at Dawood and Suleiman, but not as magical kings from a storybook. We're looking at them as supreme engineers of a functionally aligned society. In this narrative, David and his son Suleiman are given immense systemic capability. They control vast resources, heavy metals, massive infrastructure, but the text explicitly commands them to work in shukr. Now, normally we translate shukr simply as gratitude, but we need to redefine this. Gratitude here isn't just looking up at the sky, feeling a warm, fuzzy feeling and saying thanks. It's an active, conscious response to managing resources. Think of it like taking your profits and reinvesting them right back into the grid so the power keeps running for everyone. It's the functional deployment and equitable reinvestment of wealth and energy to maintain absolute systemic balance. We also have to redefine al-jinn using our lens of tasrif. Seriously, forget the supernatural genie in a bottle. In a systemic context, al-jinn represents the concealed forces, the unmanifest infrastructure, the subconscious institutional elements that are driving a society. Think of the hidden bureaucratic matrix, right? The algorithms, the administrative state, the invisible gears that run almost autonomously behind the scenes. It's the hidden technological apparatus that just relentlessly works away, operating under the illusion that the central authority is fully functional and perfectly in control. Now, this is where it gets really wild. Think about the death of Suleiman's era, as it's described in the text. His death was only revealed when a tiny, microscopic earthly creature consumed his staff, his single structural support. This is just a brilliant metaphor for the illusion of stability. It shows us that if the core living connection to guidance and truth is dead, these grand empires are really just hollow shells. They're just waiting for a microscopic catalyst to expose their total bankruptcy. That massive institutional apparatus, that hidden djinn we just talked about, it keeps working blindly. It's sustained by this sheer momentum of habit, mindlessly churning away, until a micro-corrosion, literally a single termite, brings the whole rotting paradigm crashing down. Which brings us to Section 3, Salabana and the Decentralized Collapse. Let's look at a civilization that achieved perfect localized equilibrium, only to intentionally engineer its own destruction. I want you to imagine a tale of two systems side by side. On the left, you have functional equitable distribution, which is exactly what Saba originally possessed. They built this beautiful, decentralized infrastructure with continuous transit hubs and a level of safety that was highly accessible to absolutely everyone. It was a masterpiece of true stewardship. But on the right, you see what they deliberately chose to become, a highly extractive framework driven by that illusion of autonomy we talked about earlier. They actively traded their harmonious, safe network for artificial scarcity, elite monopolies, and fractured public networks that really only serve the few at the very top. And we can trace the exact sequence of this self-inflicted destruction step by step. Honestly, it reads like a modern economic thriller. Step 1, they start with perfectly balanced environmental resources described as the two gardens. Step 2, the creeping disease of elite greed takes over. The powerful factions grew incredibly uncomfortable with this egalitarian, decentralized safety because it threatened their dominance. The text literally quotes them demanding, "Our Lord, increase the distance between our journeys." They wanted centralized wealth. They wanted exclusive monopolies, intentionally marginalizing the local hubs. Step 3, by doing this, they actively ruptured their own defensive buffers. They stripped away the very systems keeping them safe. Which leads to Step 4. The inevitable result of centralizing wealth and destroying the environment is the Sail el-Arim, a violently destructive ecological and economic backlash that completely sweeps away a civilization when it violates its natural carrying capacity. Okay, Section 4. Let's do an autopsy of systemic failure and look at the fascinating psychological dynamics of a society when the bottom finally falls out. The text strips bare exactly what happens during the fallout. When the crash inevitably hits, the passive conformists and the working class, the lower operational echelons, immediately attempt to shift total culpability onto the macro architects and the elite rulers. They cry out, "If it were not for you, we would have been believers." Come on, we see this exact same dynamic today, right? When a massive corporation collapses or an economy tanks, middle management and the general public instantly point their fingers upward, essentially claiming, "Hey, we were just innocent victims of a rigged system." But the elites? They fire back with brutal honesty, revealing a shocking truth about mutual culpability. They ask, "Did we actively block you from guidance? Rather, you were criminals." This is one of the most profound realizations in the entire text. It holds both parties entirely responsible. The passive conformists who happily enjoyed all the benefits, the conveniences, and the cheap goods of an extractive system without ever questioning it, they are just as guilty as the predatory architects who engineered it. They both actively participated in the exploitation. When the system crashes, no one gets to play the innocent victim. They are mutually responsible. So the terrifying reality of systemic collapse is this. Once a system completely uncouples itself from structural truth, it drifts into total operational blindness. As the text outlines, the collapse doesn't come from some foreign, unpredictable variable. It breaks out from inside the system's own structural flaws. And the distance to reality becomes way too great to bridge once the collapse is already underway. Attempting to adopt systemic integrity from a baseline of deep corruption while mid-collapse, it's simply mathematically impossible. Which brings us to our final section, building true systemic security. Let's redefine what security actually means. We so often suffer from the material fallacy, or gurur. It's this deeply ingrained belief that our amwal, our financial liquid assets, and our awlad, our demographic numbers or social lineage, are going to offer us genuine protection from disaster. But the text argues this is a complete illusion. True systemic reality, or deen, is built on entirely different metrics. It relies on aman, which is actual internal security of the state and mind, and amal saleh, which is constructive, systemic, corrective action. True elevation and enduring stability are not built on fiscal accumulation. It's not about how much cash is in the bank. They are built exclusively on active, relentless alignment with universal truth. So as we wrap up this explainer, we're left with a really stark warning and a profound question to ask ourselves about the structures we inhabit today. Whether we're looking at our global corporations, our civic infrastructure, or even our own personal economies, Surah Saba asks us to judge for ourselves. Are we deploying our resources for precise, equitable integration like Dawood and Sulaiman? Or are we fracturing public infrastructure to engineer artificial scarcity for the benefit of a few, just like Saba? Are we building with true systemic alignment? Or are we just waiting for a microscopic catalyst to expose our dead foundation?